I pledge allegiance to the flag.
The mission of the Exeter West Greenwich Regional School District is to empower students to dream, reach, and succeed. The open forum, comments must be directed to the chairperson of the school committee, who may limit or terminate the discussion. No comment should address personnel, litigation, or negotiations as restricted by open meetings regulations. The school committee cannot take action or vote on topics introduced that are not reflected on these terms. Do we have anyone who would like to speak? No? Okay, then moving on, we'll go to the consent agenda.
Sure. Under consent, we have the approval of the regular meeting minutes from December 7th. We have a number of personnel items, including appointments of 2 teacher assistants. These are new employees, one for one of the retirements that was accepted at a previous meeting, and one is a position that we've been trying to fill since the start of the school year. We have a building clerk that's to replace the retirement. So that was a TA moved into the clerk position, and then one of the new TAs replaces her. We have an art teacher for Metcalf. She was supposed to start this week, but she will start next week. And that's a position that we were unable to fill since the start of the school year as well. And some athletic appointments and resignations. And then we have a number of retirements for the end of this school year. And they're a combination of certified and non-certified. There is a clause in the contract about notifying the superintendent prior to January 1st in order for us to budget for certain retirement costs. And so that's why at this meeting, we typically see a higher number, because they all submitted their letters prior to that deadline. And this is the meeting that will take action. We have the monthly bills, and then we have a couple of homeschool approvals, and that covers it.
Does anyone want anything pulled? I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Correspondence, we have 3 correspondence. 2 from towns, one from Greenwich, one from Smithfield. And also the notice that went out to all everyone about the upcoming budget dates. Does anyone want to pull any of those? Not hearing any.
This was the communication that included the sign up for the notifications that we talked about at the last meeting as well.
Oh, and the contact. The 21-22 budget projection.
Yep. Enclosed in the packet, you'll see the 21-22 budget projection as of January 11th, tonight's meeting. Again, it's showing the changes to the revenue from mostly in the form of categorical state aid. The superintendent has talked extensively about that, but noting that overall, that's a shortfall of about $184,000 on the revenue side. The expenses continue as you know, budgeted and as planned. The purchase of other, I expect that number probably to move back to the positive side, but just At this point, transportation's tuitions are still pretty fluid and they'll remain that way probably until the last quarter of the year. Everything else seems pretty stable at this time. Overall, we have an operating balance positive, and then the cumulative fund balance after some of the assignments and the audit, we're sitting at a very positive on the lower right hand of 1.6 for cumulative fund balance. So still a very strong position for the district.
Now the monthly status reports. I have a couple of questions, actually one for Jim and one for Bob.
Sure.
The Exeter West Greenwich, I just wanted you to explain a little bit about the, we have a positive ratio for Exeter in Lisa. Right, so that's using the impact of enrollment. But we define enrollment. It doesn't really include the pandemic.
So this is a little bit confusing, but the preliminary numbers that came out from the state in terms of state aid are not accounting for reductions in enrollment. So most school districts in the state are projected to lose quite a bit of money. I mean, there are several that are losing millions in some cases. I know there's a lot of talking right now about trying to address that because it is impacting pretty much the entire state. However, for us, we are, even with the loss of enrollment, we are projecting not losing any money in state aid. And that has to do with one of the calculations that they do every year as part of the funding formula. I'm not an expert in the funding formula, but those calculations were shared with us. And there's something about Exeter that that the proportion of aid that we're getting is a little bit higher. The calculation for the ratio came out a little bit higher. West Greenwich went down, Exeter went up in terms of what we get, but they offset each other and in fact land a little bit at the positive. So that's our starting point, which we were told is our worst case scenario. So that's really positive news for us, and we continue to monitor. I know that there are a lot of conversations right now about how to address the bigger problem, which is that 60 of the 66 LEAs are looking at loss. But whatever changes they make will only benefit us, and we're already starting from a good place. So it's a small piece of good news.
I feel sorry for any schools that have $1 million.
We've been there.
And Bob, on the greenhouse, you had mentioned that in the report.
Yeah, I can get
What to
in.
do with the old one?
Yeah, I can get into that at the capital project. I think Jim referenced it in his status report about where we are with that. But I can either hold or address it
Yeah,
now.
we can hold.
Okay.
I just thought it was nice that the children in the special needs now will be part of the IEP discussion. I think that's really
Yeah.
positive.
Very positive.
Did anyone else have a question? Oh, I have one more question for Jared. Are we ever going to get what is it called? The Promethean boards? It looks like.
I still haven't got an answer. I've actually reached out to some other vendors to see if there's anybody who has them in stock, and if I find them, I'll cancel them. 6 months is a long time to leave. They said it was a 6-week lead time.
Yeah, we at the seed store, we had made an order. We never saw it in February, make your orders for a lot of organic, fertilizers and stuff like we always do for Spelman. And we've never seen them. And then they sent us some cactus stuff. Little ways.
Buddy has her hand raised.
Buddy has a question.
Oh, buddy. Oh, gee.
I want to make sure I'm unmuted. Okay. So I have two questions. Well, one is a comment. I just want to congratulate Lisa Borges for winning the Golden Apple Award. Ms. Borges is a valuable faculty member. She's been with us for a long time, and this is a nice example of how appreciated that she is. So congratulations to Mrs. Borges. And then Bob, on the HVAC system. So if you could just let us know what the exact status of that. I think in your report, it said that you were, let's see, they were testing the functionality of the system. I guess I'm asking because now it's really cold outside, and I don't know if fresh air and filtration is an issue right now.
So for the APAC system at the junior senior high school, everything that was part of the original scope of work has been installed, is wired, and is operating. They actually ran it so it seems like a long time ago, but it was yesterday morning. They were running the systems at full throttle. So they had maximum airflow going through all the systems, and then they were through all the units. They were operating as designed, and then they were dialing them back to get them to the the levels that would typically be held in a classroom for the classroom temperature and automation. So now that was a test that they were doing, and now what they will start to do, and they have been doing with the commissioning agent, is to now go through each one of the systems sequentially and systematically to make sure that they're operating. So there's really I would categorize it as three elements. Are they mechanically working as they're supposed to? Are they functioning as they're supposed to? So they're mechanically working, and they're also blowing cold, blowing the warm air where they're supposed to, and operating at the sound attenuation that we hope. And then three is, are we able to control it remotely? Because these are all on the computer control. So it's pretty involved. The good news is everything in the original scope of work is here. If you recall, the building committee approved an additional $144,000 roughly worth of work to address some items that were not in the scope of work. Those items are, I hate to say it, but it's kind of supply chain and just waiting for different components to come in. So that part of the project still needs to be tied up. I can tell you that there's heat in areas of this building where it hasn't been heat for 30 years, and folks are happy with that. So overall, I think we're still in great shape as far as the original scope of work. The additional work is we're subject to the supply chain.
So I guess a question, oh, I'm frozen. Can you hear me? Jeremy, am I back?
Can you hear us now?
Yep, now I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay. So Bob, I guess my question is it, are we opening, like cracking windows at this point? Like, is there anything, I guess at this point, compromised in the building as far as filtration, fresh air from the system, I guess not being totally up and running?
Note the air makeup is all working as designed, so we're drawing in the air through the system as designed. We're heating the areas where we're supposed to be heating as designed. So and Mr. Bailey would certainly let me know if he had any concerns. He's super pleased with the level of work that's been done and the outcome so far.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
And then the unfinished business, legal services.
We have
We gotta do
the whole new business section.
Oh, I have to- Preliminary 2022-23 budget.
So I'll start and then I'll have Bob speak to the binders that you all received or that we have for you if you haven't picked them up. The budget, the first draft of the budget was due to be ready for your review on Friday of last week, right? So what happens immediately after that is produced is we start the analysis process. And so, for example, we've already done a review of the staffing, which previously was just rolling over everybody. And we had a couple of retirements that came in early that we built in. But then tonight, you saw that list of retirements. So we've already started to make those adjustments, and there's a significant amount of savings and attrition through those retirements. I've already set up meetings with curriculum director, the special education director, all of the schools to begin looking at their individual budgets. We're looking for redundancies. We're looking for the wants versus the needs, those kinds of things. So our analysis process really started immediately after the production of the first draft. And next meeting, not the next regular school committee meeting, but the following day, we have our budget workshops. At that meeting, I will report out on all of the adjustments that we've made based on the review of staffing, based on the meetings that we've had with each of the people that enter the budget. We'll be in a much better place at that point, but I just didn't want you to not have the context. The context is this is a really rough first draft, and it's just based on what people put in. And sometimes they put in what they dream of having without any expectation of it coming true. And sometimes we're able to come up with different strategies to fund certain things. Well, we have to balance it out, right? You've asked for 5 things. What are the 2 things that you really, really would like to have for next year? So those are the kind of conversations that we're having. So a lot more to come, but I will start the presentation the next Wednesday meeting, which is immediately after our Tuesday school committee meeting, with an overview of the changes since your first draft was provided. Okay. So that's all I have to say about that. And I think Bob wanted to just talk about some of the technical aspects of the binder and how to read it.
Oh,
Yeah.
Bob, I need.
Yeah, if so the way excuse me, the way the binder is laid out is there are tabs. Each tab tells you which school or operational part of the unit of the district is presented. So we have the district information, the budget proposal is pretty straightforward. Tab 2 is pretty much central office, fiscal obligations, office of superintendent, office of curriculum, etc. And then each tab, I won't bore you with reading those, but I would like to, couple of comments. If we go to facilities and maintenance, which is tab number 3, in page 1, I just randomly chose this, but the break in the in reading the, as you work through the budget book, the break is on the account number. So it's the number that starts with 1 followed by the 7 zeros. And then it goes across. So all of the verbiage below that to the account note goes to that single account strand is what we call it. So, and then the next one would be right under account note is you see the 1 followed by the 7 zeros again. That's the next body of information that you'd be looking at. Reading left to right, you can see the 22 budget at the top on that account, rubbish removal on the top. Again, this is a contract. It's for 2022, 35,750. Year-to-date transactions is roughly $15,000, 14,889. The request for 2023 is 30,924. The change is a reduction of $4,826. Then as you read down, you can see the description. That's rubbish removal. The notes are, this includes the rubbish removal for all schools, year 2 of 3, and it was a bid. And then there's an account note. This is a contract for trash hauling only, does not include Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation tipping fees. So there's a bit of information there. Some of it is redundant. On some of them, you may see, in this one, it's a good description because it has a description, which is rubbish removal. The note, which kind of tells you what's going on, and then the account note gives you a little more detail. You have to understand that there's probably on this, in the body of information you have here, there's probably 15 authors, all with different writing styles and notation styles. And there just is not enough time in the day to go in there and clean up everything. So in some you may see get an account note, and some you may not, and some it's just a restatement of the description. But we continually try to improve because the goal is to give you information so you can make informed decisions. And if there's a question, we'll get it for you. It's just really that simple. Email us. We have this much information in this much time. That's really, I think, what probably most of us in our lives are up against, right? So if you need any additional information, just ask and we'll get that for you. And really that's it. It's broken out by section,
And by the next time we do a presentation, we'll have made a ton of adjustments to what you want to see, because our analysis, we're looking for redundancies. If 2 separate people budgeted for the same item, we're looking for, there's a whole checklist that we go through. But I will go over all of the changes in detail at our budget workshop meeting in a couple of weeks. You can see the level of progress that we'll make between now and that period of time.
If there are questions, and probably as we go through it, each section, the way we settled on running the report this year was each section has its own standalone report. So they start at page 1, and depending on how big the section is, how big the budget is for that particular part of the operation. So if you have a question, you can say junior high school, page 16, Bob, what's going on there? Go to the And then we can go right there. But it just makes it easier for us to.
Really exciting.
Guaranteed to cure insomnia.
If you're having trouble sleeping.
Yes.
wake up. Sure.
So last year was my first year doing the budget, and one thing that was really helpful is when I had questions, I would just email them over to Bob and Jim so that when I asked the questions during the meeting, they have the background. So they had that time to do the background. So just wanted to throw that up.
That was super helpful. Yeah. I mean, if there's anything that you really want to know more about, it may not be something that we're planning on touching on. But if you send us a note, we'll make sure that we address it, or at least we have the information, the backup to be able to share in the meeting when you ask the question. That'll be great. But certainly if things come up too, just ask the question. We may not have all the answers right away, but we'll get them to you.
You said you're doing a lot of like cost revisions currently to this. Is it worth looking at now, or is it such a state of flux right now that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really entirely up to you. Most of the reductions that we're going to make will represent wants versus needs, or things that we can move from. So for example, Marie and I were having an off-the-cuff conversation this afternoon, and we identified a few things that we know are sitting in this budget that we're going to pull out because they're appropriate for the ESSER 3, which is the last round of funding that we got for COVID relief. So there's a few items that we're able to move out of the operating budget into that. So those are the kinds of things that are happening. Certainly, it doesn't hurt to go through it just to see if there are some big items or big ideas that you want to ask about. But once we make the majority of those initial changes, we'll produce a new report for you just so that you have it for comparison purposes. So it's really about what you're comfortable with. Some people wait until after that first round. Some people read it just so that they become aware. Totally up to you.
A whole fresh binder.
Well, we won't give you the binder, but we'll give you you take out your old one and you insert your new ones in.
Budget savings right there.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Okay, and then policy. Two policies here. First one was 2,500.
So I'm going to take the lead on the first two policies because what I'm going to ask you to do is look at these together. And then Bob will take the lead on the third policy that's in the packet. So there was some lengthy conversation at a prior school committee meeting about the funding for group home aid, and we got the ruling from the state when we asked the commissioner to interpret the law. And then there was a request for me to create a policy, right? That was connected. I remember that conversation. So I did not create a new policy because when I was looking at the existing policies that we have in our manual, I saw these two policies, which combined made sense for me to add information that addressed what you asked me to do. But instead of putting a new policy together, I simply added information to existing policies. So policy 2500, all the changes are in red. And they start on page 2. And I did not limit my changes to just the group home conversation. This was an opportunity to really add some additional information. And these are all things that we do by law anyway. But if we were going to specifically write about the group home, which I did in those last two bullets, right? The second from the last bullet is about member or residents of the group home who resided in that home continuously since prior to the enactment of the Every Student Succeeds Act, because they grandfathered in as residents of our district. And then the last bullet talks about any child who is in DCYF custody, including children who might be placed in the group home going forward. This is the process that we go through to determine whose responsibility they are. And as you know, typically it's the responsibility of the school where the child came from. But I also added in all of the other special circumstances, like when a child moves out of the district, they are allowed by law to finish the semester here. If a child is in or about to enter their senior year, by law, they're allowed to remain in the district for their senior year. Any child who is determined to be homeless, there are some rules about the parents being able to identify whether the child can stay in the district. If they became homeless from Exeter West Greenwich and moved somewhere else, they could stay here. Or if a child moved into our district as a homeless child, the parent could opt to send their child here instead of where they came from. So those are all of the special circumstances that we deal with. And this just was an opportunity to kind of put them all in one place, as opposed to just addressing the group home issue, which you asked me to address. So that's part one of the change. And then if we look at policy 3201, the changes are on page 3. And in terms of the budget format, we already have in policy that we include estimates of income from all federal, state, and local sources. I just expanded on what that meant. So it includes state funding, tuition revenues, and the categorical aid. And then categorical aid includes a bunch of things, including group home aid, which I put in parentheses, paid to the district consistent with Rhode Island general law and the declaratory order that we received from the commissioner. And then our budget also includes the amount proposed to be raised by taxation from each town, and that will be consistent with the apportionment calculation method that is outlined in the district charter. And we know that that is something that is likely going to change based on the work of the charter committee. We're going to talk about that. There's an item in this agenda. But this way we're covered that no matter what that apportionment calculation method is, it will be outlined in the charter, and that's what we follow. So I did what you asked me to do, but I just didn't write it in a separate policy. I was able to add the information to existing policies. We can look at each of these as an amendment, and if you're okay with it, then you adopt the amendment, and we're good. I've done what you asked me to do.
Yeah. Third bullet. When, I know that when in the group homes, when they come from another town, now, they're paid for by the other town. And we take those numbers out, and we have them.
Correct. So that's in bullet 4.
Is that? That's it. Yeah. That's it.
So the third bullet is about the kids who have been living there since prior to, right, so there are residents. But the fourth bullet talks about that process that you're addressing. Like, for example, there's a new child who is scheduled to go to that group home this week, and there's a meeting Thursday, and it's that bullet. It's the best interest determination hearing meeting, and the expectation is that that child will remain the responsibility of the district where they're coming from. So that's what that last bullet talks about. I just needed to separate it out because there are some kids grandfathered in under the old rule, and then any new kid, that's the process that we go through it. So far, all of those best interest determination hearings have resulted in the town where the child is coming from has retained
Now,
responsibility.
DCYF, we've never been, or someone may place in Boston.
Correct. Yep. If at the best interest determination, we are determined to be responsible, then they're part of our town. But rules have changed really significantly now because they're working really hard to keep kids in a consistent location, which definitely benefits us in terms of the expenses for the group home.
There's a lot of conversation.
Yes, that was happening for a period of time. It's not happening anymore.
I thought they both. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. I'll entertain a motion then to accept as amended, policy 2500. Second. And all those in favor? I'll entertain a motion also on 3201 to accept as amended policy number 3201. Second. And all those in favor? Thank you.
So I can make this real painful and painless and say, are there any questions? And if not, we could vote on two, or I could go through a pretty lengthy explanation. However we want to go through with that.
Actually, I thought it was pretty good.
Okay.
But everyone.
I can give you some of the backdrop of it. What really started this was going back several years ago. The case that made national news was Boston Public Schools. They had over $1 million in student activities accounts, and they were not doing good things with it. We don't have that issue here, but we do have about $250,000 in different activities. So the Governmental Accounting Standards Board came up with GASB 84, and basically, if that's on the last page, if you look at the third bullet, it says agency funds have been eliminated. And that's how we used to be able to account for our student activity, student activity accounts, not just EWG, or across the country. So basically it was, we provide the schools with Quicken. They do, they do receivables and they do expenditures, and that's it. All you're tying out is you brought in 10,000, you spent 8,000, and a $2,000 balance, we're good. That's no longer acceptable. They want to go deeper and have a richer, more rigor around accounting of that. And it behooves the folks who do the fundraising. We're a nonprofit. Those activity accounts should always strive to be zero balance. Because think about it. You're asking the community who already supports us, and you're asking the parents who already support us to fund an activity, and then you have monies left over. So why would you be asking for more money from people that we ask for money from on a consistent basis? So I really would, the mentality, and it's not that anybody is overtly doing that, it just happens. They raise, because we're generous in a supportive community. So you need $300, you raise $500. Well, the activity only cost $300, so now we have a balance of $200. What do we do with that? And it kind of rolls and rolls. We have some graduating classes with, $10,000 in their activity account after they graduate. How could they not have, I don't know, you two at their prom playing, I mean, goodness sake. But anyway, I'll move away from my editorial. It is very, Tish, the treasurer, and I have worked with it. Jim has been very supportive. Our auditor is very supportive, and in fact, in the audit that we're going to, will be delivered this year, there are no longer agency funds. The student activity is recorded in the special revenue funds. So what does that mean? That means that the detail now is subject to the audit, and that means, how was the PO, who were the sign-offs, what was the requisitioning process? So it all falls under the guidance of, of the central office, which is, it's good, once we transition, it's gonna be fine. Some of the principals want to do it right away. They're like, here, take this away, because right now their secretaries are doing it. They're the ones managing it. And it can get heady at different times when you're dealing with money. So, okay.
Any questions?
And about, so I get in the context of an activity like a prom, you raise money, the activity happens. But does this cover other fundraising and gifts? Like, for example, I believe the PTA has sponsored in the past, and I may be misspeaking, so please correct me if I'm wrong. They allocated some funds to field trips. And then I believe in COVID, maybe the field trips didn't happen. So in those cases, does the money, what happens to the money? I mean, is there a loophole or a workaround that they can postpone until next year?
So that's, you're kind of getting at the nexus of the issue. So if you're in grade 2 and you're going to go to, we're going to take everybody to Roger Williams Zoo and we raise $1,000. And then the trip doesn't happen for whatever reason. The year ends and grade 2 has $1,000 there. Should it follow, like at the high school, it follows the class, because that's much easier, people tend to think of that. But at the elementary, you tend to think of it like it stays with the grade. So if that's the case, okay. But the parents who contributed to that $1,000, their student is now in 3rd grade. And so the 2nd graders say, hey, in the subsequent year, oh, let's go to Roger Williams Zoo. Oh, we have $1,000 in the 2nd grade account. We don't need to fundraise. In the 3rd grade, who raised money in 2nd grade didn't go, are now raising to go to Mystic Aquarium this year. And you could have a parent who takes real umbrage with that. From an accounting standpoint, from a burden standpoint, I think we want to be as equitable as we can. So typically those funds, we try and follow the class, but what we're really trying to get at here is to say, raise the money, spend the money. Raise.
PTA is separate.
Yeah, okay, so the PTA, so this does not include boosters, PTA, any of that stuff. They are they're their own thing, which is how we love them. They have their own 501(c), and that's where it's, I don't want to go too deep, but the way it goes, just think of taxes, okay? Like we're spending money, so the IRS can come in at any time and say, hey, look at all of your accounts. It's like, who has your DIN? And it's like,
So in that instance, then the 2nd grade just spends the $1,000 before the end of the year on something else.
that's what we want them to do. Yeah, that's what we're encouraging them.
Or it goes with that.
Or it goes with that, which is.
So they can carry it. It
Yeah.
just goes into a different account. Okay.
Right. And that's, the difficulty is just keeping track of that.
Right.
Again, we have good people doing good things. But now when you have the government coming in and it's subject to a much more rigorous audit, you need to have more procedures in place to ensure that those funds follow that.
Thank you.
Follow that. Oh,
Claudia?
Yeah, Bob and Jim actually addressed it, but I just want to say only because I was part of the board when we set up the PTA 501c3, so they're their own entity. So I just want to make sure parents know PTA is their own nonprofit. They raise funds for the school and they distribute them, throughout the school, throughout the year for different things. So totally separate from what Bob's talking about, just so the parents know.
Any more questions? No, if not, I'll entertain a motion to accept policy 601 as amended.
So
All those in favor? Say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Now, because I apparently tried to skip the business. Unfinished business, legal services.
do you want me to start? Sure. So I know I had brought this up and requested it be added to the agenda a couple months ago, or about a month or so ago, sort of in reaction to kind of seeing the increase in use of legal fees, and then also noticing that our budget that we have for this year is 35,000 for the 2020, 2021, or 2021, 2022 academic year. So I guess I'm sort of looking for some clarification, because when I looked at this analysis that Bob put together, I noticed that really, I mean, we hired our new legal counsel at the end of August. And by November, specifically if we're looking at chairperson and committee members in just those 3 months or so, we've almost matched the 2020, 2021 amount that we spent. Also, when we're looking at truancy, so I'm not sure if truancy costs have gone up because of truancy issues. But last year, in the entire academic year, we spent about 1,600, and so far this year, as of November, we're almost to 3,000. So when we hired our legal counsel, part of the statement on the CV and letter was that we would be working within the school district's existing legal budget. So my question that I'm getting to, so like, is, if we're projecting at this rate that's significantly higher, what does that mean when we hit our budget? So when we hit the 35,000.
Do we have more truancy this year?
No,
But we had a couple of things.
yeah, we've always had some cases. I think the difference is that in our previous firm represented a bunch of districts that all went to truancy at the same time. And so they would send a representative to the court, and she would be there and take care of, 4 or 5 districts. And then we would get billed a portion of the costs because she was there for multiple districts. And obviously that, I never thought about it, that saved us a ton of money. Because I don't think that you're at truancy court or anything except us. Right. So it's the same cost, but it's not distributed across 4 or 5 districts.
It is, to that just specific point, I've asked Judge DeSegna if she could give me an appointment as opposed to responding at 2 o'clock call. She's done that in order to reduce the expenses. So she's allowing me to show up at a 3:30 when she might have time, or whatever it might be on a given month that I'm dealing. And there's been a lot of preparation, expenses, in learning the files that I received that won't be repeated. The biggest problem usually with legal bills for a municipality is litigation. We've got only 1 case that's been tested that's left. I've already briefed it. You've already paid for the brief. So I don't see, obviously you pointed out conversations I had with the chairperson. I don't see those repeating. As a matter of fact, I hope you don't think I'm being negligent, but I don't think I've billed a single thing since our last meeting. So I project out to 35,000, whatever the number is. I don't see that being something it would be problematic. If it becomes, if you don't mind, I'll bring it to, I'll ask one of the members, put it on the agenda, and I'll discuss it.
Yeah, I think that's my concern, because if we look at the month over month spending thus far, and I understand that there's other circumstances at play, we're really, so,
Yeah.
but I can appreciate that. And I think it would be important that anything that's projecting over the budget amount comes back to the school committee.
Yes. We'll do that.
Any other questions? Anyone?
Looking upstairs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The charter review committee. We got that here, the whole charter, what's the changes that are recommended by the charter review committee.
So I did talk about this in some of my previous status reports, but I also have in front of you the original or the existing charter, and then all of the changes that were agreed upon by the charter review committee worked into this document. It has been shared with all of the members of the charter review committee, and they've all kind of signed off on it, that this is what they agreed to. So it basically boils down to 3 areas of change. Starting with on page 2, well, first of all, we got rid of the district financial meeting reference, which was everywhere in this document, because we don't do that anymore. But then on page 2, where it talks about the building committee, this has been something that I know the school committee has talked about over a number of years. But exactly what is the makeup of and role of the building committee in how do they report back to the school committee? So that's been something that we wanted to be very, very clear about, or the building committee, the charter review committee wanted to be very clear about. So the first round of changes has to do with that, and you'll see that it's very clear about the fact that the building committee answers to the school committee, which was not very clear in the previous draft. So that's a very general summary of that. Then on page 5 is where the apportionment comes in. And the agreement was to move to a 5-year rolling average. And then I just wanted to be very clear about how that rolling average is going to be phased in. And so the budget that we're currently in the process of working through will be considered year 1. And that means that the 22-23 budget will not be an average over multiple years, because it will just be that 1 year, right? But next year, when we do the 24 budget, we will begin to average. So it'll be the average of the 22-23 and the 23-24. We're going to continue to do that until we get 5 years. And then on the 6th year, that new year gets built into the formula, and the oldest year drops from the formula. So the method for how that happens is all explained on page 6. And then the final set of changes has to do with the charter review committee itself, how that committee is initiated, and what the makeup of that committee is, and so forth. So that also was not 100% clear in the previous version of the charter. And so this, after a lot of discussion, this is something that the charter review committee voted on unanimously to adopt. So I didn't go through everything with specifics, but I have given those 3 topics in the past. You have the draft with the changes. Hopefully you had a chance to read through them. But I think the method is that we would need a discussion in school committee authorization, because this then needs to be shared with the town so that they can do the same.
I just had a couple of questions on page 9. One that's actually highlighted in yellow. Did they recommend 2 or did they recommend 3 citizens from each member town? Because it says 2 plus.
So it can be either, but in total, each member town shall have equal representation. And the reason it's yellow is because after I did the first draft, based on all the conversations that took place, that was something that somebody on the charter review committee pointed out and said, it's unclear, you know, what if one town has 2 and the other town has 3? How do we ensure that there's equal representation? So I added that second sentence in to clarify, and when I sent the redraft back to the charter review committee, I wanted them to see that I made that adjustment. So I probably should have erased the yellow because it's confusing to you, but this is the final copy based on all the feedback that I received from the members of that
So
committee.
then who would decide whether we're going to have 2 or 3?
Yeah, so in the first paragraph, it's that the amendment is initiated by the school district. So the school committee shall appoint the review subcommittee, and we can decide if it's going to be 2 members, 3 members, but if it's 2, it's going to be 2 from each town. If it's 3, it's going to be 3 from each town, because there has to be equal representation. Right.
Yeah.
And I had a question on why did they decide on 5%, bringing it down from 10%? Because some of our towns exited 4,000 registered voters. 6,000.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, with that kind, why did they bring it down to 5%?
So I'm not, I don't know if I'm going to say this correctly, but I think there's somebody in the audience who will correct me if I'm wrong. But this has to do with just making sure that the process for initiating a charter review process is not impossible. And so 10% of even 6,000 voters is 600. And getting 600 signatures is a lot. So I think the idea was, let's try to make this so that it's not an impossible hurdle, and that both the school committee has the right to initiate, and then there's always been a strategy for a member of the town to be able to initiate, and that shouldn't be an impossible hurdle for them to do so. Is that?
That's pretty much correct. And when that initial numbers have never changed from way back in 1965. Drafted. And the town population back then was only a couple thousand people, so 10% is a big number. Now populations are very large. That's a large hill to climb for someone who wants to, that's one.
And then there's also, you know, we talked a lot about if it's initiated by, say, a community member, there's got to be some checks and balances, you know, and so that second paragraph really talks about, in addition to the signatures, you know, if the town council says no,
Yeah.
it's done. And so we want to be really clear about that as well, that if, you know, it's not an impossible hurdle to get the signatures, but if it's not something that is agreed upon by both towns, it's not much fun.
Any other questions?
Claudine has her hand up.
Buddy?
Thank you. Okay, so I just have one minor thing on page 9. Actually, same provision that Chair Allen was referring to. The first red paragraph. So 3 lines up from the bottom, where it says clerk of the regional school district committee, comma, who shall mail or deliver. So I would take out the who and put and the clerk or her designee shall mail or deliver, just because that probably is going to be Robin Serio and not at this point Donna Griffiths. So again, a minor thing, but just to, I think that's important about who's going to mail it. And I have something a little larger than that. So on page Well, page 4 at the bottom starts section 5, the annual budget of the regional school district, all-day referendum, and then it starts up on page 5. So I noticed that the subcommittee took out section C and D of the original charter, which referred to, hold on, I'm on the same right page. Actually, no, just D, I apologize, D and E in the original charter, which addressed if the budget does not pass at the all-day referendum. So there's nothing that addresses that unless I missed it. So what happens if the budget doesn't pass? And maybe I missed it.
So that actually was not talked about by the charter committee. So you must have a different version of the charter than we were working on.
Yeah, that was addressed in the last year. We didn't touch that because we were happy with the way we got. If it's rejected, it goes back to the school committee. You've got 30 days to do it again.
Right.
That's in the existing charter though, right?
Yeah, that's the
But
existing term.
yeah, so it's not in the new, it's not in this proposed charter. It was eliminated.
If it was removed, it's by mistake because that was not even addressed by this charter review committee. So I just need to make sure that it is contained in here without changes.
Okay.
So you're saying that was in section 5?
Yeah, so it was section 5. So you addressed A, B, and C of the original charter, which is all-day referendum A, the purpose was B, and C was the eligible voters and voting process. And then D is referenda subsequent to voter rejection of the budget, which is not in here. And E is failure of the referenda to yield an approved annual budget, which is not in here. So that section isn't in the new draft.
So that's just a clerical error, which I'll take responsibility for. I don't think I erased it, but it was not talked about by this charter review committee. So it needs to stay in there if that's what the current draft says. So I'll fix that.
Okay, yeah, well, I'm assuming the draft that we got is the full charter, right? That's what I was assuming.
I thought it was, but clearly there's something that got erased and I just missed it. I'll fix it.
Okay. Hold on one second. So here's my next question, because it wasn't addressed, and right now we're in a lawsuit because of this. So under section E, where it's the failure of referendum to yield an approved annual budget. So it says the school committee shall operate the school district in accordance with Rhode Island General Laws 16-2-23 and may seek any relief under the applicable laws and regulations. Because the towns also have to follow the charter, can some language be placed in there to clarify and make it, totally black and white, that Rhode Island General Law 16-2-23 and this charter apply?
That's the change, when we have to have it come to us again.
It's not that's not a change to me, because the towns have to comply with the charter, but it just clarifies.
I don't know the answer.
Should we just wait then, rather than vote on this, to get the rest of that in that was missing? See,
Yeah, I mean,
no, it's not changed.
it's nothing changed. I mean, I could certainly bring it back with making sure that you have every component of it, but I don't know the answer to your question because we believe that that's the way it should be, but clearly we have our town, or at least one of our towns, that doesn't believe that that's the way it's supposed to be.
Correct. That's why I think it should be clarified.
I don't know how to do that unless we brought the charter review committee back.
That would be the only way to do it for the charter. We have to discuss that.
which I don't think is a bad thing.
We touched upon it, but we decided not to address it because
Jim, to me to me, that's not a change. We're not changing anything in this, in the charter. To me, that just makes it clear. So I don't know why you need to go back to the charter subcommittee.
Well, I think it's clear. I'm with you. All I'm saying is that we have a town that doesn't think it's clear because they acted in a different way, which is why we have a lawsuit. So I don't know. What do you think?
Cover our bases.
I think that there's a supremacy clause issue here in that which trumps state law or your charter. And I'm sure that Exeter, if they were aware that we were going to change the charter in the manner you suggested, would file an action to prevent us from doing that. Or we could allow the lawsuit to play out. It's on the calendar in Kent County Superior Court in March of this year. And that would clarify it once and for all with a judicial review and a determination as to who's right and who's wrong. Do we follow the charter or do we follow state law? So I think that the least expensive way, because we were talking about legal fees, is to allow the court to make that decision and then react accordingly.
So do we hold on this?
I would say we leave it alone for now. Let the legal act, because if we change it and then the legal, the legal process doesn't go the way we think it should go, we are back to change it again.
Correct.
So leave it alone, let the legal process play out. Later, clarify it later, we'll have precedent. We'll allow us to change it. Right now, we'd be changing it because we believe that's the correct way, but it won't be on our side. And I think that's why we started the question on it. So
So yeah, just put in the parts, 2 parts that are missing.
And then,
And then
come, like if we get the results of
the
the
lawsuit.
lawsuit, which I expect it to be in our favor, but that's just me, then we can bring the committee back together to say that we're just going to clarify that language based on the results of the lawsuit and call it a day.
I think that's the best.
That's a strategy. I don't know. And if that's the direction, then, I mean, I have to put sections D and E back in because they were not addressed by the charter review committee, so just assume that they're there.
yes.
If you're good with the rest of the changes, then I would be able to share them with the town so that they can have their conversations, because all 3 of the bodies need to say yes in order for us to put it on the ballot for the adjustments. Am I right about that?
Correct. I believe so. But I think I'm not 100% positive, but I believe that's correct.
Okay, so I'll make a motion then to approve the proposed charter changes that are on this piece of paper. It's agreed upon by the charter review. Also, second. I think that covers. All those in favor?
Diane, can we just have some discussion for a second? Can I ask Attorney Craven a question? So Attorney Craven, because this is our charter, Exeter West Greenwich Regional School District, the town and the 2 towns, Exeter and West Greenwich. So in our own charter, I'm going back to the same issue I was talking about with the Rhode Island general law. Can't we put in our own charter, Rhode Island General Law 16-2-23 and compliance with this charter? Like, I guess I don't understand why, if we're making changes, I mean, I think we're going to win also, but if if, I don't know, I just feel like if we're making changes, why can't we make the charter the way we intended it to be written? I feel like that should have been there in the first place. Like, why do we have to wait for the court decision, I guess is my question.
Because the court may rule otherwise. And in that instance, the answer would be that the findings in the rescript opinion or Supreme Court opinion, if one of the parties decide to go to the Supreme Court, would be that there would be a reference to Exeter versus the Exeter West Greenwich School Committee. And there would be the teachings of whatever that case was, if it was contrary to your charter, as being referenced to address the very issue you're talking about.
Well, what if it's as is, maybe they're reading it as the charter is written now? What if that was specific in our charter, more specifically written?
It would be the teachings of that case that would give us the answer to those questions. It's not unusual that a town charter, especially a charter is a municipality created by the General Assembly and under its powers to create municipalities. You were given authority to formulate a school district between two towns. And so when you look at the supremacy issues and comparing what law we follow, if state law is contrary to your charter, state law trumps you. And this is an interpretation of state law versus the charter, and it would be the Superior Court that would come in and interpret that. And we will see what the Superior Court does in March, I think. So I think it's prudent to wait.
Okay. So even if our charter was written a little differently with that section, you still think, okay, I see, I hear what you're saying. Okay, I'm good.
Thanks.
The 21-22 return to school guidance. COVID updates.
Diane, I think I interrupted the vote.
Oh, yeah,
Oh, yes. Oh, okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
The 21-22 return to school guidance. Jim?
So I have shared, put it in my status report, one communication that went out. And then there was another communication that went out on Sunday, January 9th, that I also shared with members of the committee. We are kind of working through the changes that the CDC recommended and the Department of Health adopted. There was a week-long period where we knew that the Department of Health, the Rhode Island Department of Health, adopted the changes, but they hadn't put all of those changes into writing in a document that was shared with the schools, so there was a little bit of confusion for that week. But the new guidance came out. I have communicated that out to all of the families, and we're implementing. I will say that even prior to the spikes that we're currently seeing, not just us, but everyone is currently seeing, we were advocating for some changes based on the fact that our data showed that we had so many healthy, asymptomatic kids who never tested positive, but were home, not receiving the benefit of in-person learning. In fact, the number of kids that were quarantined based on close contacts in school that ended up being positive was so low that it just didn't make sense. With all this lost time, we've been advocating for this change. So we're really happy about that, but it has come during the time of the most widespread positivity that we've ever seen. However, there is, if you think about our positivity in the context of the community in the state, we are still not as positive as the community in the state around us, right? Even though our numbers are high, they're high, but still lower than the higher numbers of the community in the state. Unfortunately, right now, we're in a really tough spot, but all the projections are suggesting that we should be kind of leveling out soon, and we should be seeing that things are beginning to decline by the end of this month. That's what every single expert that I've talked to has said, based on the projections. In fact, we heard that at a meeting that you were at today as well. So that message has been consistent, which is true. But that's like our focus right now, is to really make sure that we're tight on implementing these new guidelines. I did have a community forum on New Year's Eve that was attended by about 100 community members, just to kind of walk through the changes that were coming. I sent out a couple of different communications. I met with the nurses, I met with the administrators a couple of times each. We continue to talk through the challenges that they're facing. And I think we're in a good spot at this point. And then separate from that, we know that there's staffing shortages everywhere. If you just turn the news on, no matter what channel you're on, there's a staffing shortage somewhere. And those staffing shortages are occurring for a number of reasons, including the number of staff members who are out because of COVID. We are experiencing that as well. And so you know that there was a day that Metcalf had to be closed. We had 8 regular classrooms that were uncovered. Lots of people out with COVID. Most of them returned this week, although we do have some others that are not out because of close contacts and COVID. We're going to see that all over the place. But during that day that we were off, we kind of got together and thought about how could we reopen even with all of these people absent. And so my friend, Dr. Hearn, taught 4th grade for the rest of the week. We moved our interventionists, our math interventionists into classrooms. Our principals were in classrooms. We figured out a way to get it covered, and we kind of talked that through with the union as well. And everybody kind of came together and made it happen. So that's why we were able to stay open for the rest of the week. And then of course we have the snow day, you know. So we're hanging in there, but just know that every day is a challenge with the number of people that are out. And until the numbers begin to go down and we have less staff that are impacted, we could potentially be in a position where we can't safely open the school because of staffing issues. And what I have said to the community is we're going to try really hard to make sure that we're not closing the whole district, but rather maybe one school at a time, and hopefully kind of move through all of the buildings so that at the end of the year, there's one makeup day and that covers everybody, as opposed to just, you know, closing the whole district multiple days. And what we found too is that strategy allowed us to be a little bit more creative. When we closed Metcalf, we were able to say to the healthy, non-COVID Council 94 members, hey, if you want an extra day's pay, we have shortages in the other buildings. We can send you to Wallowell, we can send you to the junior high school to cover for people that are out. So by closing one building, we had a strategy for addressing the staffing shortages that were occurring in other buildings as well. So we're trying to think really creatively about not taking mass action to just close the entire district. But, you know, in particular, the elementary kids, we know that they need to be in school, they need to be in person, and we're doing everything we can to keep them that way under pretty difficult conditions. But, you know, we're doing what we need to do, and it's all hands on deck. And it's a great expert. She might go back at some point. Who knows? Maybe next time I'll be teaching 12th grade. We'll see. That's all I have.
Oh, that's great.
So I love the creative thinking around closing different schools one at a time. One thing that I know has come up with parents is a lot of our community have multiple kids, and so parents have kids at Metcalf and Walden. And when we close the junior, senior high school, those children can often stay home alone, but the elementary can't, so the parents have to stay home. So it's double duty if we're closing the schools one at a time. So you have to stay home for your Metcalf kid and then your Walden kid. I'm just wondering if creatively thinking wise, if there's an opportunity where I know the guidance is to avoid distance learning, but perhaps it's an option for high school. And that Council 94 members could have that opportunity to cover the elementary, and that we try to keep the elementary schools open.
Yeah.
Because I know it's been a strain on the parents.
Yep.
I also-
Trust me, I have lived it.
Yeah.
So you are talking to the right person. I mean, our goal in particular is to make sure that elementary stays open. In that moment when we closed Metcalf, it was really hard because the other buildings were adequately staffed, and then Metcalf was in very difficult shape. And we had so many classrooms that were not covered and we did not have any agreements or plans for how to cover those classes. But, we kind of thought that through a little bit more. And we just know our goal is to especially keep the elementary schools open.
Yeah, I also just wanted to add on to that, I know I've been privy to very upset parents. I know that's being directed at the staff.
Mhm.
I just want to, I know you've been acknowledging and addressing that in your emails, but just publicly as a school committee, just asking parents to be patient with staff, especially, the staff that are the bearer of bad news. That is not anything they wish to deliver. I think I can only imagine being on the receiving end of that, on top of the stress of having to then also make sure your school is staffed and all of those things that weren't anything that these staff members signed up for, not part of their job description, nor do they want to be doing. So I just wanted to and thank them.
Now the capital project updated and the greenhouse.
So, capital project update. The HVAC, we got that earlier, so we're in good shape and we're moving along with that. Stage 3 for the site work, which is the greenhouse and the Walloon playground, the roofs, which are the Walloon roofs and the Metcalf roof, and the general contract work, which is the auditorium and the science rooms at the junior senior high school. Those 3 packets are being submitted to RIDE. The roofing packet will go this week, will be submitted by the 14th, and next week the general contract and the site work is scheduled to be submitted. Again, it's a 4-stage process. In stage 3, it's really about 60% of the schematic design of the projects are reviewed by RIDE, and it just brings us to a whole nother level of commitment and moving along. Significantly, with the approval of stage 3, which should take a month or so, hopefully, then we can begin to put the bid packet together and shop the projects to the street and see what the market is going to bring us. The cost estimates are very favorable for us right now for those projects that I mentioned, so that's a positive thing. So that's kind of the administrivia that's behind it. The liveliest discussion to date, although maybe that's not wholly true because the HVAC has been pretty lively because of the scope of that work. But the greenhouse has certainly elevated the interest of the community. And there's a struggle. The friction is to try to ameliorate what's happening with the community, because essentially, and this is going to sound awful when I say it, but it's like 2 years too late. It's 2 years too late to come to the building committee to say, save our greenhouse, because stage 1 was about the new greenhouse. Stage 2 was about the new greenhouse. Stage 3 is about the new greenhouse. And so we're trying to listen. The building committee is, I think Jim, you said it best, you know, it's unfair. That's the only word you can say. It's unfair to come that late in the game and say, oh, by the way, we don't want that, we want this. And so we've come up with, so I think it put the building committee in a lousy position because they're like, well, we have a design and a plan and approvals. You know, so now what do we do? And I think under several of the different building committee members really try to say, this is a school committee issue. The old greenhouse is a school committee issue. If you want to preserve that in some fashion, the school committee needs to do that because the funds and the approvals are for the new greenhouse. Having said all that, December 17th, the superintendent and I walked that whole area out there with the greenhouse and the parking lots. It's important to remember the Jacobs report, the visioning sessions, all of that included addressing student parking. So there was a parking lot in the new greenhouse, 65 spaces for students and which would alleviate faculty parking issues and all around visitor parking issues. So that was part of the plan for the new greenhouse. So it wasn't just, well, we don't want the greenhouse or we want it here or there. Everything we moved affected the parking. So on December 17th, we got the lead principal for Toronto Architects, Louis Toronto, Jim and Lou and myself. We walked the area. Jim had some information regarding the high school teachers saying for folks who have mobility issues, whether they're certifiable ADA or they're just chronic pain issues, it'd be nice if they could be closer to the school. So I think that was part of the plan. We addressed, okay, if we put the new greenhouse on the existing greenhouse foundation, we would ameliorate some preservation of it's in the same location and the same orientation, which people are really wed to orientations of greenhouses. And we could address the ADA. Toronto looked at the reconfiguring the parking. We went from 65 parking spaces to 61 parking spaces, which is non-material as far as losing parking spaces. We would land the new greenhouse on the existing greenhouse foundation, and the existing greenhouse would be put in a box and given to the community and say, you can do with it what you want. Maybe you could come up with a 5-year implementation plan as part of the FFA or whatever that, you know, I don't know, you know, what the end game is there. Putting the new greenhouse on the existing greenhouse foundation would require about $15,000 to $16,000 of additional site work, because the approved plan and the site work plan is for the new greenhouse here and new parking lot. Now what we're saying is new greenhouse here, change this parking lot and add a parking lot. So that requires core drilling, requires environmental impact, because there's going to be runoff, there's going to be, you know, there's our water system is out there, our wells, so there's some site engineering there. With the new greenhouse landing on the existing, even though there is existing mechanicals that run to the existing greenhouse, there's not an engineer in the state who's going to sign off on those existing. They're going to want to have their own drawings and they're going to want to know what's there. So that's where the $16,000 comes in. Also, there is a debate. I have no, as the Auditor General likes to say, I will not opine on the difference between a cement floor and a earth floor. What I have been told is that RIDE will 99% likely not approve a dirt floor. They will want to see a cement floor because this is ADA students, not a private sector type of thing. So it would be a cement foundation if we went with even on the existing. So that's kind of where that is a totally WG discussion. As far as Ride is concerned, the new greenhouse is going as submitted. In the parking lot, the 65 spaces are where it's submitted. And I don't have an answer, but that's where we are. And I don't know, Jim, if you want to jump in.
No, I mean, I think that the question that we asked Lewis at that last building committee meeting is, what would it take if we were listening to some of the concerns? What would it take to redesign the location of the new greenhouse and kind of reconfigure the parking, which Bob touched on, but it actually, the new parking that we have discussed actually addresses a totally different problem that wasn't part of our original conversation. And that's parking close to the building for certain staff members who need to have that more easily accessible entrance. And so that's why he came and met with us. We kind of looked at it and figured out a way to make it happen. I have communicated that to the teachers of the program. One in particular who's most involved, she seemed very happy with that decision. We also know that we eventually need to have a meeting where the science teachers meet with the people that are working on this greenhouse for decisions around, like, what's the furniture that's inside, what's the equipment, those kinds of really specific items that need to be talked about. So that's been agreed upon. And I think Lewis is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's ready to redraft. Even if it's going to cost us an extra $15,000, which in the grand scheme of things is not a ton of money. But I do think that it's important for us to show the members of the community that have showed up, that have raised some valid concerns, that we're listening and that we're trying to work with them, trying to find the right balance. And I think the comments that I made at the building committee, I'll say them a million times over again. It's not that what they talked about was, not worth a conversation, but coming to those meetings and saying, by the way, we want 2 greenhouses. Right? That's what I said was unfair. That has never been a conversation. We never budgeted for 2 greenhouses. We're going to be in the middle of a budget process right now, where we're going to be fighting for every dollar and where it goes, and to just like, oh, by the way, we need $300,000 extra for a second greenhouse. That was never part of the conversation. That's what I thought was unfair. But that aside, there certainly were some valid points that we actually listened to and tried to come up with a reasonable compromise that kind of gave both sides a piece of what they were looking for, and hopefully we're moving in that direction now. Close that gap a little bit. Because eventually we have to get moving.
Yeah, there's a little bit
Do
of a
we
sense
have
of
to
urgency
go
there.
and reapply with RIDE because of the changes?
Lewis is, the Toronto Architects is comfortable that if the revised plan, which would put the greenhouse on the existing foundation and the new parking lots as designed, they could submit to RIDE with that modification, and it would be fine. But I think to the superintendent's point, we need to bring this to closure. I would say that, again, trying to get to yes, taking down the existing greenhouse. I think the footprint with the new design, with the because they're now they break the 65, which was 165 big parking lot and break it apart. Land the new greenhouse on the existing. I think there's opportunity within that footprint for the FFA to repurpose that greenhouse at some point down the road as part of their program. The problem that I think, to Jim's point, this was not going to be a low cost, no cost effort. Once we touch that and we try and make it a classroom, it falls into a whole different, which was not part of the original plan.
Can I ask a question? Say no, but so just for clarification for me not being at the building committee, is the request to put the new greenhouse in the old greenhouse space for pedagogical reasons in terms of optimization angles and learning and so forth, or is it more historical in that this is how we've always had it, we'd like to keep it in that way?
So I think there's two reasons that I heard, but if there's anybody else that heard anything different, feel free to jump in. The first reason is to ensure that there is appropriate sunlight, and the current location, they're very happy with the sunlight and what it provides to the greenhouse. So that's a safety. It's a safe spot for everybody because they know that it works. There were some concerns about the new location. I am not a scientist, but part of the rationale for the concern was that it was very close to the school, that it provides shade to a portion of the greenhouse with the side of the school. Okay, so that was one reason. And the second reason was a desire for there to be additional space around the greenhouse for other things. Like if you go to that existing greenhouse right now, you'll see that they have a fence, that they have some beds that they've built for different purposes. And we would be a little bit more limited in the new location with the surrounding space for them to kind of expand and do other things outside of the greenhouse. Existing space actually maintains that extra acreage that we have around the greenhouse for them to do those other, whatever it is that they're doing there.
I have a follow-up to that then. So if we take down the existing greenhouse, when you repurpose it to the community or FFA or whatever group, does that stay on school property? And then what becomes the liability at that point in time if it is not a classroom? Or how is that designated? I just don't understand how that would work at that point in time.
I don't either.
I think
it would be removed.
So if you go there, you can see the hoop house, which I believe is their cold frame. So there's no mechanicals to it whatsoever. I think, in my mind, I look at it, I'm a novice in that area, but I have some, they could take the existing greenhouse, which is essentially a hoop house, and they could skin it however they want. They could use it as a cold frame. And then if they want to it's when you change the purpose of it, I think that's the nexus of the issue. It falls under a whole nother category of compliance. But as a cold frame, as with non-mechanicals, we could probably get water to it, but if you start running heat and I don't know, that did have to have a plan. And that is something that has not been addressed. And it is something that the school committee really hasn't even talked about. It's not that it can't be done, it can be done, but it will cost.
It will cost money and it can't be done right now. We're not in a position for that to happen right now based on our financial situation that we're in.
Thank you.
Got something?
Hi, my name's Alicia Cranston, and I'm a parent in the district and involved with the community members that were here at the building committee. Jim was very accurate in describing the major concern about the location was definitely the concern about being at the end of the school, not a desirable growing location. The other part of it being also that it then broke away from the continuity of having that extra space around it, because we're looking at a CTE program that's now been reestablished in the school and brought in as a true CTE program. My oldest son graduated last year with that CTE. So the way that the community and the teachers vision from their understanding of the vision meetings in the greenhouse was that this new greenhouse from bondage was to help expand our ag program for the CTE. And no one ever understood that expanding that program and adding a new greenhouse meant getting rid of the old greenhouse in any of those conversations. That's why everyone was so blindsided by that information of all of a sudden hearing that the greenhouse was being taken down and that it was being put at the end of the school. So that was where a lot of the discussion came from at that point, just to give you some from that standpoint.
So I don't want to, yes.
So, having that opportunity to have the greenhouse put in a better location is a great compromise. Giving students that ability to have it in a better location and keeping the continuity of the program. However, it actually uses the program because of the smaller footprint than our existing greenhouse. And the hope in the community and the teacher was to be expanding the program. So exactly how to put in line with the existing greenhouse and full training. That's where the vision of expanding our CTE program and trying to attract more students to our district and retain our students was the hope from that standpoint. And it would give a very polished look to our program to come around the backside of that building and see two greenhouses and full training and an ag area that's, more of an impressive program. We were trying to bring students into our program. So that was where the vision, the thought was in adding the greenhouse to the foundation. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't want us to rehash the conversations that are occurring at the building committee meeting, but I have to respond. And I'm going to respond the same way at that building committee meeting, because what you're saying, I know, is what you believe. It is not what I believe, and it is not what Bob believes, okay? And as I said, all due respect, I have been at every single meeting that has occurred since the visioning sessions in 2018. There were teachers of our program at those visioning sessions in 2018. I have the original pictures that were drawn by the members of the subcommittee of that visioning session that included the teachers of our program. And there is one greenhouse in the picture. So it has been explicitly clear in every conversation that we have had, which you have not been a part of, that we were replacing. The flyers that we sent out talk about replacing. We have not been anything but transparent from day one. And we were acting on the recommendations of that original vision session committee, which included teachers of the program, and in their own drawings, which I have on my desk, there is one picture of one greenhouse, not two. So I don't know how this exploded into this new conversation, but this is why I think it's unfair. And coming to a meeting and projecting that, it wasn't clear, it was never explained, it was supposed to be an expansion. To me, it's an unfair accusation because you weren't there, and I have evidence that the conversation has always been about replacement. And I just think that it's unfair for that accusation to be made. And I said this at the building committee, and I know that you believe differently, but you've now brought it up in front of a different body. So I'm going to say what I have to say, because I have the evidence to prove what I'm saying. I mean, so that's where I'm coming from. And again, I don't think anything that this group envisions now with 2 greenhouses is a bad conversation. It's just a bad timing for this conversation because it's 3 years in. And the first time we heard about it was a month ago. And that is unfair. It's unfair. And we are only trying to do the right thing for this program, for this community, for our teachers, and for our kids. And it's really unfortunate that it's turned into this. And we still are trying to work with you. But I cannot have people come to a public meeting and say, this is what we expected and you haven't been transparent, because that is not true. I'm done.
Anyone else? Want to speak? Oh, Dave.
Yeah, I agree with Jim. I mean, I've been part of the capital project building committee now since 2010. And it's always been to replace what's there. You know, I think compromise has been compromise. And I agree with it. Right now, it's a financial issue. So, and I just want to be clear that, I understand where it's all coming from, and I agree with what Jim and Bob said. I can back them up. And, I mean, it's been presented in public meetings since the start of the process. Prior to stage 1, public meetings to both towns, to the school committee, over and over again, getting prepared for the submittals to ride to get this far. So it's not like it hasn't been done.
I believe all the drawings that have come to the school committee also have had just one.
I know you had asked a question about the pedagogical aspect of it, and I know the concern has been presented about growing the program and that the smaller footprint seems to not grow the program. One thing that hasn't been highlighted is, well, the footprint is smaller, the height is much higher. Katie, who's the teacher who's been, who shared her vision at our last meeting, shared the challenge of today's and our future careers, in that we're consistently challenged with less space to grow, but higher population. And a solution to that is vertical gardening and other types of approaches. And this greenhouse does allow for that. And it's a really a wonderful opportunity for project-based learning, for problem-based learning. And that's what career technical education is all about. The other thing that came out of this, which I think was wonderful, was so many community members who came in and want to be a part of the program and are invested in the program. That provides opportunities for our students to leave our limited space, because we are a school, and go out onto multiple farms and multiple environments where they can have more hands-on experience. So I think that's really exciting. I think that I'm on the capital project committee. It's a lot of work, and I know Jim and Bob specifically have put a lot of time and effort into this. I appreciate that, parents and teachers are equally as invested, and I think moving forward, it's great to hear this compromise, and I think that's a great path forward. So thank you.
So maybe we should put this on the agenda. Have to building committee. When is the building?
Did we meet the school committee to approve this?
That we haven't like I said.
Yeah.
I think that's what we'd be looking at. I mean, I have the makeup. I would we would bring this to the building committee and say the school committee approves the concept of this, and the building committee has to vote on the 19th to accept the general contract, which is the auditorium and the classroom work, and then the site work, which includes the greenhouse and wall playground. So we would say recommend, or we would say, recommendation would be building committee approved the design, the ultimate design as discussed by the school committee and approved by the school committee. Right? I don't know what to vote. Now it's not
It's not on the agenda, so we can't. Our next meeting is.
But I'm not sure that you actually need to vote
Because
because
like, there's some consensus that this is the right direction that we can bring to the building committee, so they can.
I think the other piece too, just for the committee to, that was news to me, growth opportunity for me, I guess to say is, while the placement was okay, other schools, specifically, I think it was Narragansett, has purchased the same greenhouse and have had challenges. And by moving the location of it, even though it will cost the extra $15,000, ultimately the production of what the greenhouse is able to do for us will be much greater and perhaps save money on other costs that may come down the road. So I think that's an important piece.
Yeah, there's one other piece to this. The move this thing is a good thing. We didn't understand the amount of work that went into the site that the current greenhouse sits on. And our understanding now is that they actually excavated 4 feet beneath that thing and put in the engineered gravel drainage. They put in a really good base there. So even though the new one's going to require a concrete floor, I mean, you've got a really good sound base for the new greenhouse to sit on. So it's a good thing to move it. And, I think, I don't even think you guys, I think there's enough money in the budget overall. It's not going to cost any additional money. I think we'll be, we have, we're starting to develop savings in certain areas. We'll be able to divert some funds to help with some costs.
It's the right.
So I don't think we can vote on it. It's not on the agenda.
But we can bring it to the school committee. I mean, is there general consensus though that we're going in the right direction? So even just that we know that will help the conversation at the building committee level. And we'll bring it back for a formal vote, just so that we cover our bases, but at least we kind of know, like we're not having these conversations and then the school committee says, wait a minute, we're not going in that direction. So this is helpful. That's fine.
Important dates and meetings. I saw that 14th got changed to the 8th. I was wondering about that. Tuesday, January 25th, school committee meeting. Wednesday, January 26th, budget workshop. When did they start? Was it 6 o'clock?
6 o'clock.
I wasn't sure. Thursday, February 3rd, is the joint school committee meeting with the 2 town councils.
That's at 7, right, Robert?
And
That's at 6 too. Okay.
it's at 6.
Yeah.
And Tuesday, February 8th, school committee meeting, and Tuesday, February 22nd, school. Going to executive session. So I'll make a motion to move to executive session. Why don't we take a little recess so we can before we Sure.
Motion to recess and motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Oh, we can't.
Do you need to pick up the equipment before we go in to
Yeah.
executive session?
Yeah, we'll do that. Oh, no, because Claudine's still here.
Make sure I can still hear everybody. Please.
We'll collect it all.
Okay.